Okay, good afternoon, hello, and welcome. My name is Florence Mawanda. I'm the Senior Emergency Response Officer for CAFOD. CAFOD is the Catholic Agency for Relief and Development. This webinar is being co-hosted with UN OCHA and Charter for Change, which is a coalition of international, national, and local NGOs advocating for increasing support for local civil society in humanitarian work. This year's World Humanitarian Day focuses on the role of women humanitarians. This webinar is being organized specifically for that, to create a space for cross-country exchange between women across sub-Saharan Africa, with attention to challenges and to empower local women in humanitarian action. Today we have 4 speakers to take us through these discussions. We have April Pham, the Senior Gender Advisor with UN OCHA. Nasra Ismail, the Director for the Somali NGO Consortium. And we also have Mimidoo Achakpa from Nigeria, Women's Right to Coalition, to Education, Women's Right to Education. Welcome all. I'll just give April, I'll give our speakers a chance to introduce themselves before we go into the questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, one as a co-host to really support Women Humanitarians, but also as a panel to join you in this very important conversation. I'm the Senior Gender Advisor with UN OCHA and based here in New York, but supporting all of our field operations.
Thank you, April. Nasra, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, please. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, everybody. My name is Nasra Ismail. I'm the director of the Somalia NGO Consortium. It is a forum for NGOs who make up both national and international NGOs who work in Somalia. Very pleased to be here on this very important day, on World Humanitarian Day, dedicated to women humanitarians, and of course, as part of our role in shaping global voices on NGOs in our working countries like Somalia, happy to be supporting OCHA as well as Charter for Change.
Thank you, Nasra. Mimidoo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this rare privilege to be on this panel today. My name is Mimidoo Achakpa. I coordinate the Women in Humanitarian Response in Nigeria initiative. I also work for Women's Right to Education program. I'm happy to be a part of this, and I look forward to interacting with you all.
Well, thank you very much, Mimidoo. So those are our speakers. We'll be joined by one other speaker from DRC as soon as the network permits. A little bit of a housekeeping. I'm going to ask each of our speakers a couple of questions and give them time to share their thoughts on these questions. And then OCHA is going to have a moment to sort of summarize and give some highlights of the issues that have been raised. And they will also be looking on the lookout for your comments from the chat box. So please feel free to put in any thoughts, any suggestions, any questions in the chat box, and they will be picked up, and we will try to respond to each of these or give each one of our speakers a chance to respond to it. So I will ask a few questions, and our speakers will respond, and OCHA will also come in to give reflections and also point out the issues that are coming out in the chat box. So if the process is clear, I think I'll go ahead and start. So thank you very much once again for each of our speakers for joining us. I think the first question that I have is, directed at Mimidoo. Mimidoo, is it possible to share with us one example of a challenge or obstacle that you have faced in trying to participate in humanitarian action in your career?
Okay. One of the challenge we have been faced with is that there has been no coordinating effort amongst humanitarian practitioners in the country, and people have been working independently, and it doesn't seem so good to work while all the different actors aim to work towards the same, more or less same objectives, but there has been no coordination, and we have been trying to see how this can be coordinated so that there is when there is synergy in that, the end effect is more.
Mimidoo, is this a challenge for women particularly, or it's a challenge for generally for humanitarian agencies?
Well, it's a challenge for the local humanitarian agencies, because I'm talking from the national and local NGOs,
Okay.
from the perspective of the local and national NGOs.
Okay, thank you so much, Mimidoo. Nasra?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think just to frame the question, this is an excellent question for all of us, I think men and women who work in the sector that we do in humanitarian emergencies around the world. I think also the challenges can be many, so it will be difficult for me to come up with a few, but let me provide a little bit of a background of where I'm speaking from. As a director of the Somalia NGO Consortium, often the numbers of stakeholders we're dealing with as NGOs who are trying to shape and advocate for better humanitarian situations for the people of Somalia. We're trying to advocate for better evidence about how NGOs work with government, how NGOs work with communities, again, to deliver relief and to deliver services. We sit in a very privileged place of having to see an ecosystem of aid actors. One of the roles of the NGO Consortium in its founding papers has been that it is a place, a gathering place, a convening place where NGOs can come, really look at the issues that are facing the community and come up with a collective resolution. Whether this is a development issue or a humanitarian issue, one of the ideal ways we try and solve some of these issues is really a collective voice around pertinent issues that are facing the community. Another way the NGO Consortium works is obviously with the power of our membership. Almost on any given year, over the last 20 years, the NGO Consortium has been made up of about 80 to 100 NGOs, both international and local, and both having various programming in the country. And so every month we have a convening of executive directors, country leadership to look at what are the pertinent issues we need to work on, what are the communities facing, how can we better lobby and better educate the global, regional, as well as national actors on what the main ailments are. From that background, of course, for those of you who don't know, Somalia is a place that has been ravaged year on year on from different climactic issues. Often it has been destroyed by drought, with effects that can range for a long time in terms of the number of people that have been displaced in the country. Every year we deal with almost a minimum of about 1 million Somalis who are having to lose their livelihoods and or be effectively displaced because of the issues that are triggered due to humanitarian emergencies. Because of that, because of the protracted nature of the conflict inside Somalia, a country that has been really trying to come out of fragility for a number of years, what we see is challenges for many humanitarians, but particularly for women, around a few key areas. One is access. We know that in the cultural systems of workings and norms in Somalia, access is both an issue for security in terms of humanitarians' ability to access communities where we can deliver support, but there's also an additional barrier for women humanitarians who need to be able to access the cultural religious systems that place women who face very unique issues. And so when we talk to our membership, when we talk to the women and men around the table who are in leadership position, we see access both as a normative challenge, but also an additional barrier for women humanitarians who often need to be sitting with women, need to be sitting with families, need to be sitting in places where often the genders are not able to mix. And so that really presents a challenge for the system in terms of who is able to identify the right issues facing the right community members and then be able to drive at and work on the right solutions. The second issue, of course, is really one around, and this is something that our membership tell us that many of the women, most of those who work in local NGOs have told me as I've been in this role now for over a couple of years. It's really a barrier around organizations that make the workplace that they own an inviting place for women, a place that women not only can lead, not only can have a livelihood, but also that really welcomes them. And so here we're talking about challenges around culture, challenges around religion, and what women's visibility and women's work in the workplace looks like, and whether or not it gets accepted. We see many issues here, and at least in parts of conservative parts of Somalia, where this has been an issue for many of the humanitarian female workers that I either know or we represent through our forum. One of the ways we try and get at those issues appropriately in the context that we deal with is, of course, through good visibility, good media work, good training, and of course, just valuing the leadership and capacities that women, the female aid workers can provide to the system. Last but not least, I would say one of the issues that sometimes even myself I come into sharing and having to speak about is really more about just leadership within the humanitarian sector. Many of our NGOs, we have, like I said, any given year, somewhere between 80 to 100 members representing national and international NGOs. And often you will find that you are maybe one or two maximum, I would say in our context, three out of many, maybe hundreds of aid workers who happen to be women. That is a leadership challenge for myself, for the women who and the men on my board, for the organization that we represent. Any good emergency response, any good work that happens in places like Somalia need to be one where women are definitely at leadership positions, minimum 50% of the population, 50% of the leadership and structures and the boards that we have. We're very far away from that, but I would say, you know, in answering the question as best as possible, these are just some of the types of challenges that we share, and some, of course, I myself share in terms of just seeing a lack of a number of quality female aid workers who are represented highly in this aid structure and coordinating structure that we work in.
Which definitely has an impact on their voice as well. Thank you so much, Nasra, for that reflection and also the comments on the situation in Somalia. I think we have been joined by Thérèse. Thérèse, would you like to introduce yourself if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. My name is Thérèse Mema Mapenzi. I'm a director of Central Olame Bukavu, which is a self-based organization. We are CAF for Patma, and we are based in South Kivu, Bukavu, in DRC. And I'm very pleased to participate in this big conference and going to see at the end of the conference, collecting good strategies, suggestions to improve women condition. I mean, women as beneficiaries and workers in humanitarian world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thérèse. We will have a chance to interact with the specific questions about the challenge of women in humanitarian action in the context of the DRC very soon. Thank you very much. With that, we'll invite OCHA to give a summary and reflection on what has been said so far.
Hi, so it's April here, Senior Gender Advisor with UN OCHA. Just to kind of make the conversation flow a little bit better, perhaps I won't do summaries, but I might also throw in some questions of my own, because I think, some of the issues that Nasra and Mimidoo has raised, I think are things that we could probably pursue. Firstly, just to say that, this year's World Humanitarian Day is specifically focused on women humanitarians because of all of the issues that you both have just raised in terms of, the need for more visibility of women, but in particular women in those leadership spaces. Mimidoo, you were talking about, the lack of coordination and how that continues to be a challenge. And I think that, while you didn't talk specifically about the challenges for women, I think there are particular challenges, for how do we engage when the system is so fragmented and not coordinated as well. So to give the special focus of women humanitarians is acknowledging the leadership issues, the lack of representation of it's this year we're also trying to really focus on celebrating the strength and the resilience and leadership, but also, as Nasra said, like the unique capacities and perspectives that women bring, including having access to other women, and in particular when we're working in very culturally sensitive or culturally conservative communities, having women helps to navigate that access. This focus on women humanitarians did not just come out of the blue. This really resonates with, the recognition across our whole system that we need to do better to profile the issues and the concerns and the leadership of women and girls in humanitarian action. This also resonates with, the Secretary General's own agenda of trying to promote gender equality, but also trying to get us to have better gender parity to reflect exactly this issue that Nasra was talking about. That we don't want to come into humanitarian spaces and have it be predominantly, male. We want for this to be much more equal. So there's a lot of effort happening on that. Our OCHA's own, emergency relief coordinator and, for humanitarian affairs has also reinforced this prioritization, for women and girls and the gender agenda through ensuring that, in our own humanitarian mechanisms, that we're profiling these issues and prioritizing them. And I don't know if, you were following what was happening with the humanitarian affairs segment, at the headquarters level of the ECOSOC, but this year there was a lot of discussions around localization, but in particular localization from a gender perspective. It was really inviting women from the field to come and have these exact discussions that we're having right now. It's about, listening to women and listening to how they're coordinating local responses, the challenges that they have, and how we can actually amplify some of these experiences. Now, I say all of this to prefix that we're having this conversation now because it will lead, into 2020, a lot more reflections on how far have we gone as a system in terms of looking at gender equality. Because next year will be, 30 years of the Beijing Plus, so the Beijing Conference. It's also the anniversary of the Security Council resolution on 1325, which is all about, women, peace and security, but specifically on women's participation. And I think this issue of women's participation is absolutely critical. So I would really invite, all of our panelists to look at, how have you, as, women leaders, and I see you as women leaders, because anyone who is doing this, any woman who is working in this humanitarian space is actually leading, because you have to push so much to get into some of those male-dominated spaces that Nasra was talking about. So that was just my general overview, and also tapping into some of the issues that you've raised. And I hope that, you know, over the next hour or so, we can come back to some of these issues. I give it back to you, Florence.
Oh, thank you very much, April. Because Thérèse is just joining us, Thérèse, would you like to take it from there? The question was for you to share one of the challenges or obstacles that you have faced when trying to participate in humanitarian action. The different speakers that have gone so far have talked about lack of coordination, the problem with women accessing humanitarian space, the problem of organizations not being an inviting place, and the question of leadership and underrepresentation, and whether women's voice is actually taken into consideration when the situation is like this. In Congo, is this the situation, or what would be your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much for the floor. Of course, in Congo, we have the same problems, but what I wanted to share is related to the perceptions that people have on women and girls working in humanitarian worlds. First of all, I would like to mention that I work in the field of psychosocial assistance and economical assistance to empower women to become independent. And while organizing my work, I meet many women who share me some of their problems, and many of them are related to the perceptions that people have towards women. It means it can be related to the cultural aspects and also to the context where women work. So in most of the time, many people, especially the main colleagues, consider women working in the field of women, in a humanitarian work, as not respected women. Sometimes they try to harass them sexually, to discriminate them in terms of job, what they can provide as job. They don't give them good salaries, and sometimes these conditions don't provide good safety to women working in this field. And another case is related to the lack of confidence in structures where women work to denounce the cases of illegal treatment. And sometimes these perfections affect the work of women and limit them to provide good services, as sometimes you have to use a lot of energy to show that you are very strong and that you're not what people expect from you. And in this field, I can give an example. In DRC, we have the law related to sexual violence. And this law considers that the sexual harassment is a big issue, and you can go to court or to justice to denounce these cases. But most of the cases related to these sexual harassment consider a lot of time, and they are very expensive. Although women, in most of the cases, they are very limited to have money, sufficient money to pay to go in justice. And also in the part of the judges, they request sufficient proof to accept that really the woman was sexually harassed. And this makes sometimes provide a lot of consequences in terms of the work of women. There are some women who just lose their jobs, and others who just accept the working in these conditions with all the consequences. Sometimes they are not respected, sometimes they are not paid, sometimes they are considered as prostitutes. So this is what I wanted to share in terms of the work of women in the humanitarian worlds. So they are mostly linked to the perception, the bad perception related to the culture, the local cultures that we have, and how most of the time women are victims of these sexual harassments, and they don't share this, they don't denounce this because they don't trust the system, the legal system that can provide them security and so on. Yeah.
Thanks, Thérèse. This is April speaking. I think that the issues you raise are so critical. These issues around sexual harassment of women, and in particular women humanitarians, is an issue that we're all grappling with. And I think it's an issue, that is across all industries. So it's not just for us in the aid industry, but it's certainly an issue that comes back to some of the issues that have been discussed earlier around the culture, right? It's around our, the culture in society, how sexism and how gender inequalities have fueled or have manifested, some of these behaviors. Just to share that there was an independent survey by women's organizations recently that collected responses from 600 women humanitarians. And that also illustrated that sexual harassment was the #1 issue for women humanitarians, followed by a culture of sexism and discrimination, gender discrimination in the workplace, and an unsupportive environment, to women generally, across our humanitarian sector. Now, this was an independent women's survey, but there was also a survey that OCHA also did before that, where we had 1,000 respondents. And some of these issues were again raised there. So just to say that, this issue that you're raising is absolutely pertinent and something that is shared across the board.
Okay, thank you. And maybe what I add, if I can continue, I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, what I can add that the structures, many of the humanitarian organizations at national and international levels have provided the compliance mechanism to allow women to denounce. But what I can say, especially in the Congo where I'm based, this system exists, but they don't provide security to women. It's just like just fulfilling the norms that are requested to all organizations, but the follow-up of these complaint mechanisms are not very good well organized. And this does not provide security to women to denounce. So it's a kind of organizing within a frame to support or sustain these cases of sexual harassment in the humanitarian world.
Thank you very much, Thérèse. Thank you very much for your intervention. At this point, I'd like to invite our attendees. If you have any question, please type your question in the chat box, and we'll be able to see it and speak to it as we go along with our speakers. Remember, our speakers today are April Pham, the Senior Gender Advisor from UN OCHA, Nasra Ismail, the Director of the Somali NGO Consortium, Thérèse Mema Mapenzi, Director, Centre Olame, Bukavu, DRC, and we also have Mimidoo Achakpa from the Women's Right to Education in Nigeria. Thank you very much. Just to take this discussion to another phase, I wanted each one of us to share an example of good practice or idea for overcoming the challenges that women have faced in humanitarian action. One of the good practices or ideas that have been put in place or that you're aware of that has worked for overcoming the challenges and obstacles that women have faced in humanitarian action. Thank you very much. I think we can start with Nasra.
Sure, thank you so much. So I think in some ways today's discussion is really one that not only highlights the issues as everyone has said, but it really offers us an opportunity. It's very rare for me in the in the line of work that I'm in that I'm ever on the same panel with more than one woman. And so to have this webinar today with an entirely all-female leadership is very important, and I think we have to celebrate that often. This is not something that's a given. I also just wanted to appreciate the comments from everybody, particularly I think just setting and framing the discussion so well, April, because it is a broader discussion we're having. It is a discussion that I think can come down all the way to the personal level, which some of us have touched on, but there is this global movement that we are all a part of. Certainly, I mean, I was in college when the Beijing conference was at its highest peak, and everybody was talking about sort of this movement around really profiling the issues that women and women's rights are due. And certainly I was also a young development worker in Washington, D.C., looking at and learning about 1325 and the impact that it would have in many contexts. And so I think we're lucky to say that there's some success to celebrate. And I think that's what this question is pointing to. In the context that we are in, I'm reminded also from a leadership perspective, working with OCHA, working with the Humanitarian Coordinator's Office. In the last couple of years, we have, as aid community, made up of men and women, we have put our foot down and really put a lot of effort to centralize the issue of protection, which is mainly focused on the specific challenges that both displaced communities, particularly marginalized communities, all of which who have women in that segment are faced. And so we've been very happy as an NGO community to push and further highlight and amplify what we are calling the centrality of protection, a strategy that really brings that protection not solely as an element of work for the cluster system, but really brings it up as a core issue, an important and highlighted priority for all actors, government, UN, NGOs, civil society, what have you. That has been a central and organizing principle for us to put our weight on, to put more attention on, and I think I'd like to highlight that as an example of where all aid community in Somalia is putting on their focus. The second thing that I think among the milieu of issues that have been raised and that we continue to see in Somalia is there are some good practices, very specific context in our work. We have seen young people, women particularly, use social media to highlight, to amplify the work of female humanitarians, often to communicate to government and to communicate to their particular workplace on who they are, what are the issues that perhaps may not be able to be spoken about directly in the office or directly with government, but can be talked about, let's say, through a third or fourth platform like social media, be it Twitter, Facebook, or others. We've seen that to sort of galvanize communities that may not have a lot in common, and all of a sudden you see women in the global south, women in the global north, all of a sudden having a lot more commonality around issues of women's voices, women's representation, women's ability to manage the work that we see in contexts as difficult as Somalia. So I like to point that out and say, you know, there is a way where we have seen a positive aspect of social media highlight the work of female humanitarians. The second, I think, to me, is more of a responsibility of those of us who are in privileged positions, those of us who see perhaps the light at the end of the tunnel, to see how far we've come in the last 30 to 40 years around these issues, whether it's humanitarian or not, whether it's in the nonprofit, in the private sector or not. And it's one where we're paying much more attention on our boards. We're paying much more attention on the leadership structures that govern our day-to-day. We were very happy in 20 years with the NGO Consortium, this representative body of NGOs, that we look at how better we can speak about these issues about that prevent women from either leadership positions or that do not encourage young women or any marginalized group to come up and to be representative of their own community. We looked at this more carefully at a system in the last 3 years, but we took a stance as management within the NGO fora, and one of it was to in addition to lobbying and advocating for the wider community and the wider aid structure to be more welcoming to women leadership, to have more women leaders in their structures, we said, let's start with us. And so at the NGO Consortium, we balanced our board We were already balanced on a number of other important indicators, but in 2018, we were able to have a 50-50 presence of NGOs who are representing both local and international NGOs. We were also able to balance and have 50-50 men and women on our board. And I think to us that means a number of things, and I wanted to highlight that as a good example of leading from within and advocating from a place of strength, so that when we speak about these issues, we're speaking about issues that we are already living and we're trying to resolve. Managing a board that is 50-50 is ultimately a little bit more difficult, let's say, though, and it's just a bit more homogeneous, but the diversity of discussions we're having is much more tactile, it's much more important, much more representative of who's in the room and who do they represent and what are the real issues the humanitarian system needs to address. And so our diversity, the richness of the discussion, the decision making, the ability to bounce ideas off of someone else who comes from a different background, comes from a different life experience, this has been huge. It's quite anecdotal in one way, but if it really happened system-wide, we believe the data would show an important level of decision making that we do not see, let's say, when you don't have that kind of gender parity in boards and in management structures. The last thing I'll say here has been an important element for all of us to remember, something we practice in our management here in Somalia, something we practice as part of our role within the humanitarian country team, and that's to not see women's issues or women humanitarian experiences as just for women to resolve and for women to live. Men, what we call male champions, are also really important here, for their voices to be highlighted, for their voices to support the voices of those who may not have reached a level where they can speak on these issues with greater platform and greater acceptability in the context and cultures that they live in. And so we try to balance our work, both giving space for more women to describe their own issues and to take on those issues further to different platforms, but at the same time recognizing we need the support, we need to make space for the work of male champions at all spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasra. Certainly a lot of good things that are being done to improve the situation of women in humanitarian action. I'm particularly drawn to the idea of having a balanced board of 50-50. How was that idea taken by the previous management that was there? Would you just like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it was really, really interesting to me, somebody who had worked on development issues before I came into the humanitarian sector, to be faced with what it's like to work in parts of the country where our NGOs are active, which is in conflict, where you don't have much access to qualified women in the sector, but at the same time, it's just a difficult environment where you have to really get uncomfortable very quickly about what you can and can't do. And I think the other speaker who also spoke about perception. Is there truly, one of the discussions we had around the table was, do we truly have a pipeline problem? Do we in the sector in Somalia see that we don't have qualified, able to take charge women who can be part of boards, who can be representative in the HCT, who can be the heads of agencies? And I think more than likely, we were working on a number of assumptions that have not been tested. And so through our networks, we just took an example and we said, if every one of us, there's 9 of us on the board, if every one of us just makes a call to the woman or 1 or 2 women that we know, who we are impressed by, who works in the industry with us, who perhaps does not carry the title of a director, but who in every other way exemplifies the kind of leadership that we want, might that person be someone that we can support? And within a few, I think, weeks of making calls and digging into our network and avoiding the usual sort of perceptions around what a leader is and whether or not they have, again, certain titles or they're already deemed as a leader in the sector, we found that we didn't have a pipeline problem at all. But again, it's a perception problem at once. Second, it's really an issue that does not that needs to be tested. And I think ultimately what happened with our management, what we're very pleased with, I was pleased with, is that we were not afraid to have the tough conversations of calling each other out on our assumptions, of making sure that we were able to, again, be creative about how we go about finding the humanitarian workers who we need, whose voices we're missing, and then ultimately to come around and agree on, look, the skills and the voices we're looking for may not look exactly like the ones who are in the system, but there is a need to say we need them at a minimum, and it will affect how we work, how we hire, how we empower, and how ultimately we amplify the voices. And so taking a small risk in some areas really helps with our management. And I think, again, at the end of this year, we will also be able to nominate other women to come onto our board, and we've set a precedent, and that's been really important. Just to start the process has been really critical, and I was very pleased that, again, ultimately we're able to have some tough conversations and reach a decision and not worry about external pressures that often get in the way of good work.
Well, thank you very much, Nasra, for that.
It's April here. I just wanted to come in very quickly, just to be a little bit confrontational on this issue of perception of competence. I find it very interesting that when it comes to appointing women, this issue of competence comes in so much more than when it comes to appointing men, right? I feel like the standard is the man, and women get compared to that as if the average male humanitarian that we all interact with is the best, the most competent person. And I think that is something we need to also debunk. I'm sorry, I've worked with quite a number of very incompetent men. So I think this threshold in terms of how we judge the competencies of women need to also be, critiqued. Because I only find that we only ever talk about competencies when it comes to women and this issue that you're talking about in terms of pipeline. So thanks.
No, April, that is a really great point, and that was one of my challenges coming into it, and sort of, again, from a development background where I think for some odd reason it seemed easier to have this discussion, a lot easier to have it around not only localization but what we called in our sector as country ownership. This was quite challenging to me, and I think how I understood it was something along the lines of, these are even if they're not accepted, but these are real perceptions that those men in our sector have. There are certain privileges, again, that exist, and some of those privileges are not necessarily those won by competency and fantastic performance. It's really, again, a boys' club, if you will. We see that in the entire global structures that we're all dealing with, and not just in the humanitarian sector. But the way we found to at least move that conversation in a way where it was more constructive, rather than having a debate for hours and hours on whether or not we can find, again, yes, quote unquote, qualified women, was just to put it to a test. And to in fact put the challenge back to those who challenge the notion of women's competency and say, let's see if you can find one or two in your own network. And so I think that you're not meaning to be confrontational, you're meaning to be a truth teller. We have to figure out a way to address that and make sure that when those issues come up, they don't stand in the way of good practice, but we were able to entertain them and say, okay, we hear you, wherever that perception is coming from, but we need to move further. That's been the only way I've found so far in the context that I'm in to move the conversation further, but certainly it does trigger a privilege that has gone one-sided, let me say, and stop there.
Thank you very much, Nasra, for that. I think it's a perfect segue to invite Mimidoo Atogba for women's right to education. Mimidoo, we've been focusing on the board and the capacity of women in humanitarian action. If you could just take the discussion from there and give the experience that you have in Nigeria for overcoming the challenges and obstacles that women face in humanitarian action.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think for us in Nigeria, one of the key obstacles is the issue of leadership for women. And so we think that if women are made to lead, making women leadership and gender as a standalone, it would help go a long way, because women being at the forefront of humanitarian responses, their impact is critical, and therefore their input is also essential in decision making. And urgency in challenging the gender stereotypes. For instance, in Nigeria, in most of the camps that we have, they are all led by men. So we think that if women form part of the leadership of the camp coordination, it will help go a long way. And then secondly, there will be need to push further in advocating for the full implementation of gender policies at the national level. We have these policies in place. For instance, I was part of the team that worked on the Nigerian Action Plan on the UN Resolution 1325. Several states government level, but it is yet, most states in Nigeria are yet to duplicate the National Action Plan. Nigeria has a general gender policy which is in place, but is yet to be domesticated at all levels in country. So we think if this is pushed and serious advocacy is done for the full implementation, it will help go a long way. And then thirdly, there isn't any data. I mean data as in women-led organizations work on humanitarians in country. When we started the Women in Humanitarian Response in Nigeria network, we decided to do a mapping of NGOs. We didn't have the resources to do that. So what we did was we designed a mapping instrument and shared amongst our networks. And we had a meeting with UN OCHA, the country team, and they agreed to help us consolidate the mapping at the end of the exercise. They have done that for us, and they also came up with infographics for us. But we think that Nigeria, a large country, it has 36 countries, which makes it 37. What we did, because we haven't been able to states, the mapping we have done thus far is concentrated only in the northeast and in the north central part of Nigeria. What we intend to do is to cover all the countries, all the states in Nigeria. We do not intend for it to be restricted to the northeast or north central alone, because it's a national network for women organization. So there will be need to do a comprehensive mapping and have a database of all the women-headed or women-led organizations in country. Then the need, we also discovered that no woman is included on the HCT, even though at the cluster level, for instance, I attend some of the cluster meetings in Abuja and in Maiduguri. However, the HCT and the ISWG, we think that women should be involved, should be on especially the HCT. So because as I speak now, in country there is no woman, except in the northeast where the OHCT is. I know that a woman is represented there. And then lastly, there will be need for, I talked about the issue of coordination earlier. We have started something at the national level, which is inclusive of male organizations and the rest of it. there's already a network in place. It's still new, and the Women Network, which has been very, the women, the already mapped organizations have been very supportive. So we think if there is that synergy, if we come together to work together, it will help go a long way. On the issue of capacity, which was mentioned earlier, while I was at the African Regional Conference on Localization Aid in Addis, one of the key things that came up was the move from talking about capacity development, building and strengthening, to capacity sharing, exchange, recognizing the two-way nature of capacity sharing and the importance of complementarity. So if that is done, it will help go a long way, because for us in Nigeria, the INGOs that come, we think that capacity sharing for complementarity will help go a long way, because the local actors are the ones that are closer, especially women, because in any time any crisis erupts, it is the women that are the first respondents in any such community. So we think that the issue of capacity development, building and strengthening should be changed to capacity sharing and recognizing the two-way nature, so that we learn from them, they also learn from us, because we are here, we are we know the communities, the INGOs. When they come, they still depend on the locals to carry out their work, either by partnership or by employing those locals to carry out their work. So for now, this is what I can say. How again, a push for international actors to recognize the capacity of local actors in humanitarian response. Even if we measure this differently, for instance, we value financial management, but we should also value community engagement as highly, even if it is not as crucial for donor compliance. So that is what I can say for now.
Thank you very much, Mimidoo. Thank you for the points that you have raised. You had mentioned something about there are no women in the humanitarian country team.
Yes.
But the criteria for joining the humanitarian country team is not necessarily for gender. So how would you propose that this situation is changed?
Well, like I said, we have a national network which brings together all the actors, and then we have the women network. The leadership, the HCT can consult with these networks, inclusive of the women network, and then come to a compromise, or they can ask the network to go back and have discussions and then present to them whoever would be on the HCT.
This is April speaking. Very pertinent question that I really wanted to come in and amplify. Mimidoo, you raised some really critical issues, and I really wanted to speak to this issue on women's leadership and participation in HCTs. It is certainly one area of focus that we as OCHA, and in particular the ERC, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, is very committed to. We've actually, the ERC, Mark Lowcock, has recently requested humanitarian coordinators and humanitarian country teams to make special effort, whatever shape or form, and some of the ideas that you raise, you know, are quite good. You know, he's actually asked them to do much more to engage and to bring in women leaders into our decision-making spaces. And in particular, local women's organizations. So I'm certainly jotting down some of the ideas that you raised in terms of, you know, maybe if we don't have direct access to the HCT, how do HCTs connect with and consult and get the views and perspectives of local organizations? Leading to this, I think one of the issues that you raise is around accountability. How do we make our leadership accountable to ensure that they are engaging. Because when you talk about this network of all of these women leaders who are responding, who have capacity, and I think that your point around, you know, this move away from strengthening capacity, I would totally support, because I think women are dynamic. These women who are responding, they do it without, you know, any guidance from anybody. They're just doing it because it's your community, you live there, you know, you resonate with the issues, and you do what must be done. And I think that some of these issues and capacities exist already, and they don't need to be strengthened. It's about that exchange that you're talking about. So how do we ensure that we are now, you know, pushing for more accountability to make sure that humanitarian coordinators and humanitarian country teams are engaging with women like yourself and networks like yourselves? I think I'm going to take this up because I think we've already communicated to humanitarian coordinators to get them to step up. So certainly in the countries that we have strong presence in, we would certainly try to support humanitarian country teams to do better.
Thank you very much, April.
Thank
Again,
you.
I'd like to remind our attendees that the chat box is open. Please, if you have any comments or questions or suggestions that you'd like to be addressed during this discussion, please feel welcome to include that in the chat box on your screen. Now, I would like to invite Thérèse Mema Mapenzi to address the same question of how you are overcoming the challenges and obstacles for you, yourself, or other women in the field concerning humanitarian action.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to raise the example concerning the campaign that has been developed by one organization working in DRC. It is an international organization, and this organization has developed the system of complaints where an outsider auditor can control the complaints from the workers. And this has provided confidence to the people, especially to women workers, to denounce any kind of problems inside the organization. And I think this system is very good because it gives confidence to women, and they don't have any more fear to denounce what is going wrong within the organization. And some of them are not afraid to lose their jobs because an outsider is controlling this. At the same time, the women who denounced, they are not known, they just denounce, they name the person who is responsible of these crimes, and the person is followed, and the organization also follow up the case and send it to justice. So this is very good. But the main issue and the main challenge is the reparation that women don't usually get. Of course, it's still in process. We are working in coordination with women, especially in Bukavu province, in South Kivu province, where we use the social media to share some of the issues concerning women problems. And in these groups, it's a WhatsApp group. We are around 50 women working from different organizations, international, nationals, and civil society organizations. And there we discuss about all the issues concerning women. And we meet once or twice a month to discuss about the different problems that we collected. And through this meeting, we have time to provide strategies, but also information about women and why we are not changing our lives. And the good result of this is that sometimes we organize lobby or advocacy meetings to contact people working at the national levels and who are involved at the decision-making levels to discuss with them how we can help women to get their rights or to some humanitarian condition be improved. What is very important in this network activities is that we don't work only with women, but also sometimes we invite men colleagues to discuss with them. Because in the past, men used to think that we are like the protagonists. We are accusing them, we are not serious. But when they were invited in the meeting, they could also understand and listen from us what were our main problems. And sometimes they help us to raise awareness on positive behavior of men. So we usually call it positive masculinity, how a good man can behave. So as I said before, we usually have the problems of cultural perceptions. So many men think that a woman working in an organization, a woman earning money or getting a good salary, she's not a good woman, she's not a faithful woman, and they have different perception concerning them. And this sometimes prevents many men to accept that their wife can work. Or when you are in an organization, your male colleagues can discriminate you and misunderstand you considering what you are doing or providing as work in your service. So in this way, we also encourage women to participate at decision level positions, because when we analyze different cases of discrimination, women don't have possibilities to denounce them, because when they have to denounce, they again meet the male colleague who are taking decisions and who sometimes protect their parents. So it's now important for us to encourage women to occupy the good positions, so that when we have to complain, to bring our challenges, we can find someone who understands us or who can influence the different policies to put them in place and to make them practice. And finally, we also develop the situation of defining the different needs of women and girls working in humanitarian worlds, and to see how we can assist them. As my colleague said, from Nigeria said, we like to develop the capacities of women, because even if we say that some women are discriminated, but there are also some colleagues, women, who do not cope with their colleagues, women, to help them. Because when you are, sometimes when a woman is at the position, at the decision-making level, sometimes she's not supporting other women to collaborate with her. So sometimes we discuss about these issues and we see that it works. For instance, last year, there were the modification of law related to workers. In the past, before last year, in DRC, a woman could not work without a permission from her husband. And some of the women share the problems related to this, getting this permission from their husbands. It was hard. And some of them had to lose their jobs only because the husbands did not allow them to work. So we discussed within different women forums, and some of the members went to the national level and discussed about this, how the government can change this law. And now women are released and the government has changed this. You don't need anymore to ask for permission to your husband to work or to travel for the work. But we encourage women to work in harmony with their families, to discuss, to collaborate before traveling to a world, because we can resolve one problem and create another one if we don't compromise within the households. So this is what I can only share related to the way we try to bring women collaborate and make very well the work as humanitarian workers.
Thérèse, it's April here. I just wanted to say thank you to you raised something that's just still percolating in my head, and it's around these issues of you know, how we as women humanitarians are still dealing or grappling with some of these perceptions and prejudice and discrimination related to, very traditional gender roles, right? It's about how are women perceived, and when we step out of those roles to lead, to speak, to challenge, we face additional risks. And just to say that, this is exactly the reason why we have, the profile of women humanitarians in this particular year, but of course it should be every year, because it recognizes that, women, in addition to being humanitarians, and in addition to, all the risks that we face, we also risk facing, the ostracization and the stigma that you've just, alluded to. And I think that this is something that, we also need to tackle in terms of looking at how do local, and in particular from my perspective, how do local women humanitarians grapple with these multiple forms of discrimination that we experience, on top of language, on top of cultural background, the gender expectations, the lack of humanitarian space, etc., etc. So thank you very much for raising that.
Thank you.
Very much. Just before we go to the next person, there are a couple of questions that have been asked here, which we will take the opportunity to ask as we go along. Before we go into those questions, perhaps I can invite Mimidoo, if there's any comment you'd like to make to the question that has been raised so far, the issue that we are discussing so far.
Can I ask that the question should be rephrased, because the line...
The line is not clear. I was just giving you an opportunity to jump in case there was something that you wanted to comment.
When my colleague from DR Congo was speaking, and when April spoke, I couldn't get quite that's fine.
Okay. Okay. I'll send the questions to you privately. If I could just highlight some of the questions that have come in so far. There is someone who is asking, she would be interested to know how the strategies and the protocols on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse are being implemented by local and national NGOs. What are your experiences on that? Perhaps we'll start with Thérèse.
Thank you. Can you come back again, please?
Yes. Vanessa Doreen Hugo was just asking, how are the protocols on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse being implemented by local and national NGOs? What are your experiences? Just briefly.
Our experience is that most of the time the people do not trust on the legal system that we have in DRC. But we, as organizations, when we have possibilities to assist the people who are sexually abused, we provide them this legal assistance. Because as I said in my presentation, most of the time this legal assistance is very expensive, and many women are discouraged to denounce these cases. But when an organization has resources and financial means to assist them with good quality of assistance, they trust on us. And another issue is related to the customs that we have. So we may go to justice, but the big challenge is that the women will not get any reparation concerning what she has been accused of. For instance, in our cases, a woman should stay victim, and when she is sexually abused, all the men understand that she's not a good woman anymore, she's not clean anymore. And when we go to justice, of course, the perpetrator is arrested. But then there will not be any compensation from the woman who sometimes lose her job. And if she's still a girl, there are cases, there are schools where they don't accept a girl who has a child born from away, for instance. So you understand that she loses all of her chance to continue her studies. But now we are working on these issues. For instance, at the Catholic organization, we raise the voice of how Catholic schools can take these girls who have been abused to study again, to regain schools. So these are still strategies. And also we are making advocacy to fight against impunity and to get reparation from the sexual abuse. This is what we do in Pham.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I just have another question that I'm going to take from the audience. Somebody was asking, what is the role of the current protection from sexual exploitation and abuse global champion on tackling the toxic masculinity and ubiquitous sexual harassment in the humanitarian workspace? There was a lot of high hope for this position, formerly held by co-champions from the Interaction and OHCHR. There was hope that this would result in more concrete changes in the United Nations and in the NGO workplace. It feels a little lukewarm for now. Perhaps just a little bit of discussion about this. April, would you like to take that?
Hi, it's April here. The current champion for sexual exploitation and abuse is Filippo Grandi from UNHCR. And certainly UNHCR, I think, is one of the UN agencies with quite a lot of experience on highlighting the prevention and response to sexual exploitation and abuse. Just to say that there is quite a lot of attention and a lot of effort around developing better guidance for field colleagues around SEA. Certainly from OCHA's point of view, we also have a $1 million fund to support local organizations with investigations when you don't have the local resources. So I would welcome anybody to, to try to access that if you need the support. Now, there's actually quite a lot of effort at the moment in terms of trying to come with a pool, bring together a pool of coordinators that can actually help the field, because we know one of the problems with this issue is the fragmentation. Right? Like so many agencies have their own guidance, have their own protocols, and what we need is harmonization. So in places where you have a PSEA network, that tends to work better. And so one of the efforts, and in particular by IOM, is training a pool of coordinators that they can deploy and to support country teams. But it's not only IOM, many of the UN agencies and the big INGOs are also trying to step up their effort, with having designated focal points and designated coordinators to take this work forward. Now, having said all those positive things, there's a lot of rhetoric. We talk a lot about how we need to do better on SEA. So I've done my positive spill, but I'm going to join you in echoing, the sentiments of the person who made the question. That yes, we have so much more to do, and this does come down to the lack of accountability in the system. Earlier on in the discussion, we talked about the lack of reporting mechanisms, where it's not clear, where do you report, who do you report to, who maintains a confidentiality, how are victims and survivors supported. But the biggest issue that you've just raised now is around that cultural change. How do we change this masculine culture, or this culture of privilege that not only exists in humanitarian system, but it assists across the board, right? We're talking about the power dynamics between men and women, between groups that have power and between those that don't. And we know that when you combine that in humanitarian action, that's a terrible recipe. Hence, you know, one of the ways in which we're addressing this is to have more women. When you have more women, that calls for more transparency, that calls for more diverse perspectives, that calls for also more people being watched, basically, right? And that's how we also challenge this toxic masculine culture, or toxic masculinity, as Thérèse had just mentioned. So I think this cultural shift is something that we can't change overnight. It's a work in progress, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, thank you very much, April, for that. I think that perfectly takes us to the next set of questions that we wanted to ask. For ideas of collaboration to overcome the obstacles and to support local women to engage in humanitarian work. I think I'll just invite Thérèse to share with us any ideas for how you have worked in collaboration with others or as yourself with your particular agency to overcome the obstacles to support local women to engage in humanitarian work.
I'm sorry.
Thérèse?
Yes, hello. Thérèse speaking.
Welcome back. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I heard it. So
Go
I was
ahead.
saying, as I said before, in South Kivu, we work in a network group, and where we organize kind of lobby and advocacy activities to see how women can raise the voices of different cases of women. And we try to meet with some political women to influence them develop strategies to protect women. Because we have observed that most of the times the women are not, women's problems are not taken into consideration because the politics developed at the national levels, they are not followed up, and they are not taking into consideration the situations of women. Of course, we have laws and good legal texts. Unfortunately, the practice are still a big issue. For instance, as I said, the law related to sexual violence. This law provides the list of infractions and the list of all the strategies that the justice can use to provide safety and good techniques to protect the victims. Unfortunately, in the government budget, they don't provide any money to protect the victims or any money to assist the people who are victims of these discrimination or these sexual abuse. But I was collaborating with my colleagues of Rwanda, because Bukavu is near Rwanda. And in Rwanda, we found a good example, and we are discussing with our colleagues how our political women can learn from this experience. So there they have Women National Council, and this collaborates with the women working at the grassroots levels, and they can share different situations that they found related to women. For example, in the past, so before the 2014, women couldn't have the right to access to land, for instance. And this was a very big issue. In the same way, some of the women working in the humanitarian world or the working women couldn't have the same right as the men. But after the genocide war, they found that there were no many men. So all the situation, all the work have to be done by women. And also some of the women in some families where the law says it's only a man who should own a land. There were many families where there were no men anymore. So this created several conflicts. But from the time that there were this big bridge between the National Council and the women working at the grassroots levels, humanitarian women collect information from the grassroots levels, and they send them to the National Council, and the National Council of Women can now discuss during the National Assembly about these women problems and find solutions. So we think that this is a good way of collaborating and influencing policies to help women come to work. But also we raise the case of the good management of the complaints, and this should help to build good confidence in the system of helping women to denounce all the cases. When there are no confidence in the people who can support us, it is difficult to invite women to denounce. So this is what I can share from now. Thank you.
Hi, it's April here. I think we may have lost
Nasra?
Florence. Oh, okay. Sorry, we're having technical issues.
Hi, April. I heard you, but I did not hear anyone else, but I heard my name.
Hi, it's April here. Florence, are you there? I'm not hearing you.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't know if
Welcome back. Sorry, I think there was a little problem with the technology, but that's okay. Nasra, if you can hear me, I was just asking that you loop into the discussion. I was asking that you loop into the discussion as to the capacities or the things that agencies, either as the Somali NGO consortium, the agencies that you represent are actually doing to improve the situation for women humanitarians. Thérèse had talked a little bit about the networks that they are forming in order to lobby for pertinent issues. I don't know what the situation is in Somalia.
Yes, thank you, Florence. Absolutely. I think, on this topic, it's almost surprising how very familiar all these issues we are talking about are to each other, despite how varying the contexts are, varying the actors are. From us, on our side, we have a very active NGOs at all levels. Those who represent the broader NGO community who are part of the HCP. I know we've been talking a lot about sort of that UN structure that we are all a part of. We also have NGOs who are active nationally, regionally, and globally around the different streams of work. Many of our NGOs, especially the INGOs and the locals, have really come together in the last couple of years to really have a common vision and a common voice around representation, participation within the schemes of localization and the commitments that the humanitarian sector has made in 2016 around the World Humanitarian Summit on some of those grand bargain commitments around how we better transform our world through good decision making, good participation, decent enough transparency and accountability. What we see from where we are is an ecosystem of 8 actors that includes NGOs who have been around for some more than 40, 50 years working in Somalia, others who are coming into it anew, and all of them charged with how to solve some of these complex issues that our communities are facing, while pointing and centering the stories of women of marginalized communities. It would be difficult for me to come up and tell you exactly how all 100 of our membership are tackling this, but what I can tell you is a few key things. One, the more we are talking about this at different level, the more I think this issue of not only amplifying, not only supporting, but meaningfully including women humanitarians into the system, into the decision making, this is serious. This is serious not only because of the issues we're dealing with and the need, the desperate need for women to be there at decision-making tables, to access the stories that we need to access and to better align our solutions to the problems we're dealing with. It's also imperative, like we said, broader than the humanitarian sector, really into the public and private sector, into government, on who represents the citizens of each country, making sure that government itself is accountable to the community by way of representing them meaningfully. It's also, and many more than hundreds of studies have showed that this is also important to the bottom line of those who are more profit-seeking or who don't identify themselves as nonprofit or NGO. And so this work that we're doing to systemically shift the world to be more balanced, to be more representative, to voice and meaningfully provide a platform to women and those marginalized. This is serious business. This cuts across all sectors, and so that kind of investment for us is something that we try and link into. So it's not just considered something just for today because it's we're commemorating Women Humanitarians on August 19th, but because this is something that cuts across everything that is a necessity. The second thing is, depending on which of our NGOs you're talking to, you will very easily find those that are really focused on not only gender mainstreaming, but also protection as a centering, as a key priority for all of their country mapping, all of their country strategies, to ensure that, again, their solutions are informed by what's the issues on the ground, informed by our communities, our clients, our beneficiaries, and the issues that they face. To add to that, I would say, one of the interesting benefits of the work we have been doing in the last couple of years on localization, the advocacy for more equitable services to local and national communities, for more of a balanced capacity and power sharing and financial and risk sharing models between and among international and local actors. One of the great benefits for us in Somalia has been this sort of, again, a surprise to me in the last couple of years, is most of my work on this has been opposite many amazing, powerful, pioneering women who are leading the charge on localization on both international front, but also on the local front. And I would even say more powerfully, these voices of women humanitarians at the local level have been from local actors. And the local actors entirely, I would say, except maybe for a few, but the majority have been led by women. And I just want to name them just to give them credit, because I think it's really important to not talk just in generalities, but to be very specific. We know in Somalia, if you just Google or come across this topic of grand bargain and localization and who's really pushing actors to do more, to be uncomfortable more because of the power elements inherent in localization, inherent in voice making, you'll find Degan Ali, who represents and is the head of an organization, a local organization called EDESO. You'll most likely find Halima Aden, as well as Mama Amina Haji Elmi, who also represents an NGO called Save Somalia Women and Children. They've been active in the sector for a long time, and they have been spearheading through our membership platform the work of localization and the power of shifting power and decision making and resources to better enable local actors to take truly take on the role of first responders. You will also find Hibak Ali, who has been the head of the NEAR network, who I think Mimidoo and others are also aware of. They've been a Global South forum that's been able to take charge of this issue around Global South voices, Global South interaction and networking and advocacy to take these issues, not just from a national and regional level, but also really to inform global policies at capital cities I can name so many more, but I think again it's really important, and I take it as a place of sort of recognizing the gratitude that I owe to them, of paving the way, of making sure that we can get this work done with good examples and good women to point to, who not only take the work forward, but also I think are a light for a lot of young women who would need to see themselves reflected in the system. So besides that, I think what we come into in terms of bringing this back, sure. Just a couple of things, maybe just to finish off on this. How do we take this work forward? I think some things have already been said, but I just want to highlight 4 of them really quickly. One is the power of platform and networks. I think whether it's women's rights organizations or women-owned organizations, this is very critical for any work that we hope to impart knowledge, wisdom, but also strategies. I think I share what our colleagues have said in Nigeria about data, and I just want to caution that yes, we can provide a lot of data. We hope to do a lot more data on who are the actors are in Somalia who are women rights oriented or owned by women. And the important thing there is we'll do the data, but as well, we will make sure that we don't fall for the good thing of producing data, but without action. So we need to be invested. And the last thing here I'll say is, again, connection, coordination, coaching, all these things are very good for women's organizations and women leaders in Somalia. What we have found is without proper investment upfront for meaningful inclusion, that we're just sort of speaking words that don't necessarily have impact on the ground. And then some of the others, maybe I'll share via email.
Thank you so much,
Great.
Nasra. Thank you very much. We had to have those points pointed out at least. April will do a summary for us of this session.
Hi, everyone. Look, we're running out of time, and I certainly don't want for us to get cut off. But just very quickly, I want to just thank, all the speakers, Nasra, Mimidoo, Thérèse, for highlighting all of these critical issues. And I think the issue that sticks out for me is that we still need to recognize, champion, and promote women's leadership. And I think this can't be stressed enough. And you've all showcased, during this panel discussion, the need for us to continue to do that, in particular of women, local women's organizations and local women leaders. Now, just very quickly to recap some of the key critical issues that we've raised today is around, sexual harassment, about, women humanitarians working in very male-dominated spaces still, that we continue to face security risks to working in this sector. We still face a lot of gender discrimination related to gender roles, and that there is still a lack of meaningful engagement, of women in this space. But I also want to flip it around and now focus on some of the recommendations, in addition to what Nasra has just highlighted, because I've been trying to capture them while you were talking. And I think that this is the more critical part, right? Like women, and in particular for us as women humanitarians, we're great at pointing out all the challenges, but we're also even better at giving solutions. Now, the solutions we propose don't always get picked up, but I think they're worthy of, continually being amplified. And if I can just say, I noted about 7. Well, I noted 6, and then I've added a 7th of my own. So the first we talked about was around having better reporting mechanisms for sexual harassment, but I would say even for broader issues of harassment. Second was around promoting this gender parity and making sure that we have more women engaged in this work. And that we have more women in management and decision making, and women in leadership. This includes meaningful engagement in humanitarian country teams, but also more broadly in other fora. The fourth is around needing to engage with men to also, I don't want to say champion, because gender equality is a philosophy, it's a way of being. It's not something you champion. gender equality is to do with both men and women. So men need to get on board this agenda, and I don't think it's our work to do the work for them. But I do think that they need to be a part of this conversation, and they need to be taking it much more seriously. So how are men batting for some of these issues so that it's not just women doing all the work? The fifth is around this challenging toxic masculinity. And for me, this is the big piece of the work that takes a lot of time, which is the cultural shift. How do we make cultural change? How do we change the way in which power dynamics work between men and women, where women are seen to be secondary? And the sixth, for me, and some of the issues that you've raised, is around profiling and giving visibility to not only women's leadership, women's strength, and women's resilience, but also women's experiences, needs at both a practical and strategic level. And I added a seventh point recommendation, which is that we need to continue as women humanitarians to call out the system when there are challenges, and to advocate and to demand and to amplify a lot of these issues. I think that there is so much power, in particular for local women's organizations and networks, that when you come together, and as Nasra said, when you bring together these women's networks, you have a much stronger voice. And for me, working, in a UN entity, if I can just say, we listen. And I think when women come together, you can make those demands. You can demand to be listened to. The power is in your hands. And I really would invite you to just keep pushing the system to do better, because, we have a long way to go. So just on that, I'm going to throw it back to Florence to do the final wrap up. But I just want to say a personal thank you so much for joining this conversation. And it's certainly a conversation that we will keep going.
Thank you very much, April, and thank you all for joining in this discussion that has been done ahead of the World Humanitarian Day on the 19th of August. Thank you also to Mimidoo Achakpa from the Women's Right to Education in Nigeria, Nasra Ismail from the Somali NGO Consortium, Thérèse Mapenzi, Director, Centre Olame, Bukavu, and April Pham, the Senior Gender Advisor from UN OCHA. Thank you very much for participating in this forum, and happy World Humanitarian Day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.